Your entire perception of history is probably constructed on a bedrock of untruths, not minor errors, but huge intentional propaganda efforts aimed at shaping your thoughts in a particular direction. From the noble Spartans to the crafty dictators, a narrative has been sold to you. Today, we're unveiling the evidence and revealing 33 of the most brazen historical deceptions ever carried out. First, the legend of Spartan honor stands as one of the most effective public relations campaigns, promoting a cruel slave-driving regime with fascist overtones. The portrayal of Spartans as gallant warriors defending freedom is a masterclass in historical misrepresentation. In truth, Sparta constituted a totalitarian society constructed on a foundation of a vast enslaved populace known as the Hellos, who were terrorized into compliance. Remember to like, subscribe to the channel, and comment on where you're tuning in from. The entirety of their military culture was not birthed from a devotion to freedom, but rather from an intense fear of an uprising among the enslaved. Every Spartan citizen effectively served as a full-time soldier and jailer. Their famed resilience and rigorous training from infancy was all orchestrated for one single aim: to uphold a cruel system of oppression. They were not heroes. They were overseers of a vast, intimidating penal institution. Secondly, the Mona Lisa was not regarded as a world-renowned masterpiece until it was famously purloined from the Louvre in 1911. Prior to that, it was merely another exquisite painting amidst a very crowded collection. Yet, when an Italian handyman known as Vincenzo Peruggia concealed himself in a closet and walked out with the painting the following day, he unwittingly triggered the most remarkable art marketing phenomenon ever. The theft became a worldwide media phenomenon. Newspapers splashed her image across their pages. Individuals who had never set foot in an art gallery suddenly developed an obsession with the missing Lisa. When the artwork was finally retrieved 2 years later, it transcended being just a piece of art. It morphed into a sensation. It returned to the museum as a global icon, renowned not solely for Da Vinci's artistry, but for its starring role in an international art heist. Thirdly, referring to tea as an entirely British beverage is akin to labeling pizza as a fully American dish. It holds some truth today, yet it disregards its true origins. Tea is inherently Chinese, and the British did not uncover it through refined cultural exchange. Instead, they became addicted to it, akin to a national dependency. In the 1800s, Britain's craving for Chinese tea was so relentless it resulted in an enormous trade imbalance. The Chinese sought silver, not British commodities. Thus, in a strikingly immoral move, the British East India Company commenced the illegal smuggling of opium into China to establish a new market and rectify the balance. The image of a sophisticated Brit enjoying tea is a cleaned-up version of a history steeped in addiction, trade conflicts, and the imposition of narcotics upon an entire country. Fourthly, the glorified image of the samurai as dignified, Zen-like warriors adhering to an honorable code is predominantly fantasy. In reality, they were the armed enforcers for the feudal class, effectively sanctioned thugs for their lords, the daimyos. The infamous right to slay commoners who disrespected them wasn't just folklore, it was a chilling fact. While a code of honor known as Bushido did exist, it often resembled more of a flexible guideline than a strict law. And it was heavily romanticized long after the samurai class had lost its actual influence. Forget the noble warrior poet. A more truthful depiction is that of a highly skilled, frequently brutal member of an elite military caste whose primary responsibility was to keep the peasantry subdued and wage violent turf wars for their overlord. Lastly, the assertion that Benito Mussolini ensured the trains ran on time represents the ultimate propaganda deception. A pitiful effort to credit a tyrannical dictator with at least one achievement. It serves as a participation trophy for fascist successes. And even that claim is deceptive. The reality is that Italy's railway system had already begun significant enhancements and repairs right after the First World War, well before Mussolini and his black shirts staged their march on Rome. The post-war revival was already in progress. His regime merely took credit for the labor others had initiated, loudly heralding any minor enhancements as proof of fascist efficacy. It epitomized the scenario of arriving at a celebration organized by others and then insisting one orchestrated the entire event. Even the single achievement that people often tout he managed to not realize. Sixthly, the British colonial narrative depicted Aboriginal Australians as primitive hunter-gatherers traversing a wild, untamed territory. This convenient falsehood was utilized to rationalize the appropriation of their lands. The truth is astonishing. They were adept practitioners of advanced geoengineering. For countless millennia, they nurtured the earth on a massive scale, employing intricate methods such as firestick farming. These controlled fires were designed to eliminate underbrush, encourage particular plant species to thrive, and create grazing areas that attracted kangaroos for more accessible hunting. In certain areas, they constructed intricate stone weirs and canals, stretching for kilometers to cultivate eels, establishing one of the oldest aquaculture systems known to mankind. They weren't merely existing within nature, they were actively influencing and managing it. The colonists perceived wilderness because they lacked the understanding to see a sprawling garden that spanned a continent. 7. The notion that Adolf Hitler violently seized power in a dramatic coup is a perilous oversimplification. He was not a revolutionary storming the gates of government. Rather, he was a politician who was given access willingly. In January 1933, Hitler was legally and constitutionally appointed as Chancellor of Germany by President Paul von Hindenburg. The reason? The nation's conservative elite, comprising influential industrialists, politicians, and military leaders, were terrified of a communist uprising. They perceived Hitler and his Nazi party as a valuable, controllable instrument to dismantle the left. They naively believed they could install him, leverage his popular support for their own objectives, and subsequently discard him. This became one of the most disastrous political miscalculations in history, a clandestine arrangement that allowed a madman to seize control of power. 8. We envision Leonardo da Vinci as the quintessential solitary genius, an isolated figure enclosed in his studio, conjuring the future and crafting masterpieces. However, this portrayal is largely a romanticized myth. Leonardo actually led a vibrant, productive workshop, akin to a contemporary creative director managing an agency. During the Renaissance, this was the common practice. He had a cadre of apprentices and assistants who ground pigments, prepared panels, and even painted complete sections of his art, such as backgrounds or less significant figures. Numerous paintings solely attributed to Leonardo likely bear the brush marks of his skilled students. He was undoubtedly a singular talent, yet his prolific output was a result of collaboration, effective delegation, and outstanding project management, rather than just isolated inspiration. 9. The depiction of Thanksgiving with pilgrims and Native Americans celebrating a harmonious meal stands as one of America's most compelling founding myths, a touching tale embedded in every schoolchild's consciousness. Yet this sanitized narrative is a clever piece of propaganda that conceals a harsh reality. While a brief meal in 1621 likely took place, it was merely a temporary ceasefire in what would develop into a protracted saga of colonization, broken treaties, sickness, and violent dispossession. The original Thanksgiving story gained popularity in the 19th century, particularly by President Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War, to foster a narrative of collective unity and divine intervention. It functioned as a marketing strategy to craft a wholesome origin narrative, conveniently omitting the genocide that ensued. 10. Genghis Khan. The mere mention of his name evokes images of a ruthless barbarian horde marauding and slaughtering across continents. While the violence aspect is horrifyingly true, the notion of mindlessness is pure propaganda from the civilizations he obliterated. In truth, Khan was an exceptionally effective nation builder and a genius in governance. He unified conflicting nomadic tribes into a disciplined empire governed by a legal code, the Yasa. He established a postal system akin to a pony express called the Yam, which facilitated the rapid transfer of messages and goods. He even introduced a type of passport, the paisa, that ensured safe passage. He championed religious tolerance and promoted trade along the Silk Road. Undoubtedly, he was a fierce conqueror, yet he constructed one of history's most organized and sophisticated empires on the ruins of his adversaries. 11. Queen Elizabeth I is renowned as the Virgin Queen, a title that implies a life of selfless dedication to her nation. However, this was far from a mere personal choice. It was one of the most astute, long-standing political strategies recorded in history. Her single status served as her most powerful diplomatic weapon. By perpetually presenting the possibility of a royal marriage, she skillfully manipulated the monarchs of Spain and France, pitting them against one another for decades without ever settling down. In her own realm, it averted a clash for power among her nobles and ensured that no man could stake a claim to her throne through marriage. Her dedication to remaining a virgin became a 45-year masterclass in political strategy. transforming her private life into a tool for the state that maintained England's independence and stability. 12. The colonial myth that Africa is a dark continent, inhabited by people dwelling in huts, is a profoundly racist and enduring piece of propaganda intended to rationalize exploitation. It willfully neglected the presence of vast, wealthy, and advanced empires. Consider the Mali Empire in West Africa. During the 14th century, its city of Timbuktu emerged as a global hub for trade, culture, and education. Its University of Sonor boasted a library containing hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, attracting scholars from throughout the Islamic realm. Centuries prior to the heights reached by Oxford or Cambridge, the ruler of the empire, Mansa Musa, was so immensely wealthy from gold and salt that his pilgrimage to Mecca actually upset the economies of the nations he traversed. This was not a land of huts, it was a land of empires. 13. The tale of Pearl Harbor is etched in the American consciousness as an entirely unexpected bolt from the blue attack that jolted a peaceful, unsuspecting nation into war. Although the assault itself was a tactical surprise, the notion that an impending conflict was on the horizon was certainly not. Strains between the United States and Japan had been rising for years. The US had placed an oppressive oil embargo on Japan, effectively cornering them. American intelligence had successfully decoded Japanese diplomatic messages and was aware that an attack was imminent somewhere in the Pacific. The triumph of propaganda was casting it as an unprovoked and villainous strike. This narrative swiftly eliminated any public discourse or isolationist feelings, unifying the entire nation behind a declaration of war with righteous indignation. 14. In the classroom, Pythagoras is depicted as a brilliant, slightly geeky mathematician with a passion for triangles. This is a significant understatement that overlooks the most captivating parts of the narrative. Pythagoras was not merely a numbers expert. He was a compelling mystic who led a full-fledged religious cult. His disciples, the Pythagoreans, resided in a secretive commune, took oaths of loyalty, and believed in the transmigration of souls or reincarnation. They also adhered to an odd set of rules, the most notorious of which was a strict ban on consuming beans, possibly due to their belief that beans contain the souls of the deceased. Thus, the man credited with the foundational theorem of geometry was also a guru who established a clandestine society centered around mathematics, mysticism, and an ingrained dread of legumes. 15. The pilgrims aboard the Mayflower are depicted as pioneers in pursuit of religious freedom in the New World. This is a partial truth that warps the essence of freedom entirely. They were not advocating for a world where anyone could worship freely. They were religious separatists, so extreme and intolerant that they could not endure life in England. Subsequently, they fled from the more tolerant society of Holland because they feared its liberal culture was corrupting their children. What they sought was the freedom to establish their own stringent theocratic society where only their interpretation of religion would govern. They were not crafting a pluralistic sanctuary. They were escaping a world they deemed sinful to construct a stricter one. 16. Et tu, Brute. The dying words of Julius Caesar, a heart-wrenching acknowledgement of betrayal by his friend Brutus. It stands as one of history's most quoted lines. The sole issue is that Caesar almost certainly never uttered it. Those renowned last words were created by William Shakespeare for his play Julius Caesar over 600 years after the actual murder. It is brilliant drama, but it is not history. According to the Roman historian Suetonius, who wrote about a century and a half after the event, Caesar's contemporaries claimed he either said nothing at all, pulling his toga over his head in resignation, or that he murmured in Greek kaisu teknon, translating to, "You too, my child." Not quite as catchy, is it? 17. The narrative suggesting that Franklin D. Roosevelt and his New Deal solely resolved the Great Depression is a treasured piece of American political mythology. The actual reality is significantly more incendiary. Although the New Deal played a vital role in offering relief and restoring a fragment of public trust, serving as an essential lifeline, it did not completely remedy the economic affliction. The true catalyst that ended the Depression wasn't a governmental initiative, it was World War II. The immense demands of global warfare propelled American industry into a frenzy of productivity. Factories that had once remained silent began operating around the clock, producing planes, tanks, and ships. Unemployment effectively reached zero, as people were either in uniforms or engaged in producing goods for those in military attire. It wasn't social reforms that rejuvenated the economy. Instead, it was an earth-shattering war that created a level of industrial necessity that the world had never experienced before. 18. The portrayal of the kamikaze pilot as a willing, fervent volunteer, joyously sacrificing his life for his emperor, stands as one of the most compelling and distressing examples of wartime propaganda. While some of them were indeed true believers, a considerable number of these pilots were not volunteers in any genuinely meaningful sense. They were extraordinarily young, often college students who faced conscription and immense psychological pressure. Within the collectivist society of Imperial Japan, refusing such a demand would impose unbearable shame not only on oneself, but also on one's entire family. They felt trapped. Their diaries and final correspondences often reveal not fervent passion, but profound love for their families, fear of mortality, and a resigned sense of obligation. They were victims of a desperate military regime that transformed its youth into guided missiles. 19. We're led to believe that Charles Darwin was a solitary genius who uncovered the theory of evolution. This narrative elevates him to the status of a scientific superhero, but it isn't entirely accurate. The notion that species evolve over time had been swirling in scientific discussions for numerous decades prior to his contributions. Pioneers like Jean-Baptiste Lamarck and even Darwin's own grandfather Erasmus Darwin had put forth earlier iterations of evolutionary theory. Darwin's true brilliance lay in his ability to provide a plausible mechanism for how evolution occurred. Natural selection was his key innovation. He and Alfred Russel Wallace, who arrived at the same concept independently, packaged the theory with such compelling evidence and logical rigor that the world could no longer dismiss it. Darwin didn't invent the automobile, but he engineered the first dependable engine that powered it. 20. The Soviet propaganda apparatus depicted Joseph Stalin as the great helmsman and a military strategist who expertly navigated the USSR to triumph over Nazism. This is a grotesque fabrication that masks a horrifying reality. The Soviet Union emerged victorious in spite of Stalin, not due to his leadership. His disastrous leadership entailed dismissing his most seasoned army leaders right before the war, disregarding countless warnings about the looming German invasion, and making catastrophic tactical choices that resulted in the encirclement and demise of millions of soldiers. The victory was secured through the unimaginable sacrifices of the Soviet populace. The nation's vast industrial capabilities shifted east of the Urals alongside a ruthless military strategy that treated human lives as a perpetually renewable resource to expend against the enemy. 21. If you ask anyone to identify the world's oldest university, they would likely mention Oxford or perhaps Bologna. This is a classic illustration of a Eurocentric historical perspective. However, the truth is found in Fez, Morocco. The University of Al-Qarawiyyin, established in the year 859 by a woman named Fatima al-Fihri, holds the Guinness World Record for being the oldest continual degree-awarding educational institution in existence. It was a vibrant center for learning, drawing scholars in fields like science, mathematics, and philosophy well over 200 years preceding the initial signs of education at Oxford around 1096. The myth of European academic superiority conveniently overlooks the rich intellectual legacy thriving in the Islamic world while much of Europe languished in the Dark Ages. 22. The French Revolution is marketed to us with the heroic slogan of liberty, equality, fraternity. It's an exceptional tagline for a movement that supposedly liberated the masses. However, it conveniently omits an unofficial fourth term: terror. Following the initial insurrection, the revolution devolved into a time characterized by extreme anxiety and state-sanctioned violence, referred to as the Reign of Terror. The newly established government proclaimed that a terror was essential to cleanse France of its foes, whether actual or perceived. The guillotine, dubbed the National Razor, became the emblem of this era, executing tens of thousands ranging from King Louis XVI to the revolutionary figure Maximilien Robespierre himself. It served as a harsh reminder that the pursuit of a utopian society can often rest upon a foundation of countless lives lost. The United States Constitution is rightly celebrated as a historic document. However, the notion that America singularly emerged as the creator of modern written constitutions is an exaggerated narrative of national superiority. While the U.S. Constitution indeed marked a groundbreaking achievement, the spirit of revolution was resonating across the globe. Merely a few years later, on the 3rd of May 1791, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth enacted its own constitution. This was the first modern written national constitution in Europe and the second worldwide. Sadly, this ambitious venture in enlightened governance was quashed when Poland was divided by its more dominant neighbors, erasing it from existence for over a century. It is a crucial chapter in history that illustrates that the battle for freedom was not solely an American narrative. The tale of Galileo Galilei is frequently recounted as a simplistic story of a courageous scientist confronting an ignorant, oppressive church. He is depicted as the ultimate symbol of sacrifice, for science imprisoned and tortured for advocating that the Earth orbits the Sun. This representation severely oversimplifies the truth. In reality, Galileo was an intelligent yet tactless individual who possessed numerous influential allies within the church. His downfall was equally linked to his political maneuvering pride and insulting remarks towards the Pope, as it was to his astronomical endeavors. Importantly, when confronted by the Inquisition, he did not embody martyrdom. He recanted his statements. His punishment was not a dark dungeon, but rather house arrest in a succession of luxurious villas where he had staff and continued to work all the while receiving a pension from the Pope. It was a degradation, not martyrdom. We are all taught a particular year as the conclusion of the grandest empire in history, 476 AD, the year the last Western Roman emperor was overthrown. It is portrayed as the instant civilization's lights extinguished. However, this is akin to claiming that a multinational corporation went bankrupt, when in fact it was merely its struggling branch in America that shut down. The Eastern Roman Empire, based in the vast metropolis of Constantinople, seemingly did not receive the news of its decline. They continued to thrive as Romans conversing in Greek, yet still embodying Roman identity for another 1,000 years. This empire, which scholars now refer to as the Byzantine Empire, safeguarded classical wisdom, codified Roman legal principles, and constructed architectural wonders like the Hagia Sophia. To assert that Rome fell in 476 is to overlook a millennium of its legacy. It represented a significant contraction, not an absolute demise. The Age of Enlightenment. It sounds wonderfully forward-thinking, doesn't it? A period of reason, freedom, and illustrious philosophers in powdered wigs articulating the unalienable rights of humanity. Yet this intellectual upheaval is underpinned by a chilling hypocrisy. During this same era, the 17th and 18th centuries, the brutal industrial-scale transatlantic slave trade reached its height. While the intellectuals in European salons deliberated the essence of freedom, European economies flourished on the back of the anguish experienced by millions of enslaved Africans. The very sugar that enhanced their coffee and the tobacco that satisfied their cravings were cultivated through a system of human bondage unparalleled in its cruelty. It serves as a sobering reminder that one can advocate for freedom in theory while simultaneously profiting from slavery in reality. Soviet propaganda effectively crafted a narrative portraying Vladimir Lenin as the cherished leader of the proletariat, elevated to power by the people's will. It is a compelling tale, yet it conveniently overlooks the fact that the populace actually cast votes, and those votes were against him. In November 1917, during the only genuinely democratic national election of the revolutionary era, Lenin's Bolshevik Party was soundly defeated, securing less than a quarter of the total votes. The Socialist Revolutionary Party emerged as the clear victors. Thus, what did Lenin, this supposed advocate for the working class? He allowed the new administration to convene for just one day before commanding his soldiers to disband it at gunpoint. It was the quintessential sore loser move. If you can't triumph in the election, simply eliminate democracy altogether. Hi. The term barbarian evokes images of a savage, filthy brute intent on destruction. That's a masterpiece of ancient Roman public relations. The term originates from the Greeks, who used barbaros to describe anyone who failed to speak Greek, as their speech sounded like unintelligible barbaric noises. The Romans took this disdainful term and turned it into a weapon. A barbarian wasn't necessarily uncivilized. They were merely people inhabiting areas beyond the authority and control of the Roman Empire. It was a clever propaganda label that stripped away humanity from everyone, ranging from the cultured Persians to the Germanic tribes, making it morally and politically convenient to conquer their territories, seize their resources, and impose Roman dominance. It was the original playbook of us versus them in politics. 29. The narrative of Rome's downfall resembles a thrilling blockbuster where a virtuous, powerful empire is suddenly overwhelmed by savage barbarian hordes. However, the reality is less like an explosive event and more akin to a slow, painful deterioration. Attributing the collapse of the Roman Empire solely to the barbarians is akin to blaming a mere gust of wind for toppling a tree that has been decaying internally for years. For 3 centuries, the Western Empire was gradually weakening itself through devastating hyperinflation, endless civil conflicts with a constantly changing roster of emperors, catastrophic plagues, and an over-reliance on barbarian mercenaries to safeguard its borders. By the time the Goths and Vandals made their final assaults, they weren't breaking into a mighty fortress. They were entering a condemned structure. 30. We've all encountered the vintage footage from 1914. Crowds of young men cheering, beaming and waving as they march off to World War I. The persistent myth suggests that an entire generation was filled with a joyful patriotic zeal to fight for king and country. In truth, this excitement was the result of one of the most powerful and misleading propaganda campaigns in history. Governments on all sides marketed the war as a brief, glorious adventure against a monstrous, inhuman adversary. Posters and newspapers promised heroism and a swift return by Christmas. These men weren't enlisting for the industrialized carnage of trench warfare. They were signing up for the fictional war they had been sold. The smiles reflected a glorious promise, not the horrific reality that lay ahead. 31. History is often shaped by what is deliberately excluded. A prime example is the Battle of Grunwald, in 1410, one of the largest confrontations in medieval Europe, where a Polish-Lithuanian alliance decisively defeated the formidable Teutonic Knights. Here's the uncomfortable fact for subsequent Russian historians. Russian regiments from Smolensk fought valiantly on the Polish-Lithuanian side against the Germanic invaders. This detail starkly contradicts the carefully constructed narrative of an eternal struggle between Russia and the West spanning centuries. So, what did the Tsarist and later Soviet history textbooks do with this significant occurrence? They mostly overlooked it. For centuries, this monumental battle was largely minimized or erased because the facts didn't align with the propaganda narrative. 32. The official story is neat and unequivocal. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were a tragic but necessary evil to compel Japan's surrender and avert a costly American invasion. This narrative portraying the bombs as the sole cause of the war's conclusion serves as a powerful piece of post-war justification. However, the reality is infinitely more intricate. By August 1945, Japan was already a defeated nation crippled by a naval blockade and its cities reduced to ashes by conventional firebombings. Many historians contend that the true pivotal moment was not the atom bomb but rather the Soviet Union's sudden declaration of war and subsequent invasion of Japanese-controlled Manchuria. For the Japanese leadership, facing a frightening two-front war and the looming threat of a communist takeover was a total nightmare. The bombs provided them with a face-saving reason to surrender to the Americans, a fact that conveniently molded the post-war world. 33. Joan of Arc, the devout teenage shepherdess who guided the French army through divine visions, represents a perfect tale of faith and miracles. However, the historical facts indicate she was more of a fervently dedicated, nearly fanatical military emblem than a gentle saint with visions that were, to say the least, politically advantageous. The notion of an uneducated peasant girl commanding an army is quite misleading. She did not devise battle plans. She served as a charismatic figure used by French leaders to uplift spirits during a time of great desperation. Her heavenly visions conveniently coincided with the political goals of the Dauphin, pushing for his coronation and the removal of the English. Whether she was truly divinely guided or simply a product of her own profound faith and the political strategies of others, she became the ideal tool for propaganda in a struggling war campaign. Thus, history resembles a crime scene and we have identified 33 of the most apparent culprits. Yet, we understand that the conspiracy runs much deeper. We've constructed the argument. Now you take on the role of the jury. What is the one historical falsehood we neglected to mention that drives you absolutely nuts? We want the comments section to serve as the ultimate exposé. Remember to hit that like button, share this with your fellow seekers of truth, and subscribe with the notifications activated so you never miss our next historical inquiry. The truth is worth defending. We appreciate your viewing.